Hi everybody, I'm Stu Harrison. I'm here at Merriam Pianos and we're at the main Oakville showroom just outside of Toronto, Canada. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another piano review. Today is going to be a shootout that people have been asking about for months. On my right, we are fortunate to have with us a Steinway B 7-footer. On my left, a C. Bechstein B212. These are two of the most dominant 7-foot pianos in the market. And for people, whether you're in the United States, in Canada, countries throughout Europe, countries throughout Asia, for people coming into the market who have approximately $150,000 US to spend on a piano, you're thinking 7-foot, there is no way that you can avoid one or both of these instruments in your searches. And people have known that we've had these two instruments side by side. They've been asking this for a while, so we're finally getting around to doing it. I'm really excited to share these two musical beauties with you. Not only are we going to be playing the instruments side by side so you can hear them, and by the way, I want to talk about how we've got them mic'd up. There is no effects that have been used, and the mics that we've been using is Sennheiser shotgun off the camera for vocal and just some room noise. Then we've got an AKG 414 that's picking up sort of a mid-distance right above the bell of the piano, and then right at the rear of the piano we've got a capsule condenser microphone. So identical mic setups and placement on each, identical levels, and absolutely no affecting done to either sound. So we're going to try and give you as true a tone as we possibly can on both. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started with the Steinway. Enjoy the video. We're going to be focusing first on the Steinway. That's what I'm in front of right now. Now the example that we're in front of right now is a used example, but it's one that's in incredibly good shape and fairly recent. So this is from the 5.6, 5.7 million serial number range, so we're well into the 2000s with this piano. Certainly a really good example of what Steinway's currently putting out. And besides a few very small differences, is going to resemble a brand new Steinway sold in 2017, 2018 quite well, and I really enjoy playing on this piano. The Steinway B has for probably more than a century been the benchmark by which most 7-foot concert grade instruments are measured. And there's a good reason for that. If we go back to piano design in the late 1800s, where piano making was still very much in an experimental phase. You had instruments coming out with different sets of keys. There were some with 85 keys, some with 88 keys. You had instruments coming out with 2 pedals, 3 pedals, 4 pedals. You had some instruments where even the way in which the action was being built was really completely different. This was an industry still very much in, if not its infancy, still in a growth stage. Lots of consolidation, lots of design work going on. And in amongst all of that growth and innovation, Steinway set up shop in New York and started one by one chipping away at the technical challenges that were still plaguing piano design, right from started in 1853, but going right through the 1860s, 70s, 80s, as Steinway will usually quite enthusiastically remind us of. There were hundreds of patents that were filed for this piano. And they were solving a lot of the problems of the day and improving piano design to a point where they really did give us the basis for what pianos looked like throughout the 20th century. And so of course they deserve a ton of credit for that. And a lot of those innovations that are now more than 100 years old still have application in today's piano market and today's piano design paradigm. So the Steinway B is just under 7 feet long. I think they call it a 6'11" or 6'10½". The scale design has been around for quite a while, and this instrument, like several of the other models, has some really interesting design features, construction features to it. Like all the Steinway Grands, their inner and outer rim is constructed in a single laminating process of hard rock maple. Now, any musician who works with instruments where wood is part of the primary resonating surface, like a drum or, of course, string instruments, that also applies to, will tell you that the type of wood, the thickness of the wood, how the wood is dried, has a really big impact on the tone that that piano presents. And Steinway making the decision to use solid hard rock maple, and also the decision to fuse both the inner and outer rim together really in one construction process, has given Steinway one of the hallmark tonal traits, which is this almost impossible to distort mid-range clarity that a lot of other instruments, even when they have tried for that tone, have been unsuccessful in attaining. And so the fact that they're using the hard rock maple gives the piano an incredible projection. Other instruments made of this type of wood, a lot of drum makers use hard rock maple, will talk about the projection and talk about the clarity that maple brings, because it doesn't really distort even when you're putting a lot of energy through those fibers. And so for a piano initially built for power and clarity and dynamic range, which the Steinway definitely was, maple was an ideal choice. And so they're using maple in the bridges, vertically laminated maple and maple cap. You're using maple through the rims. There is, without a doubt, no other way to describe a Steinway piano other than this piano is, if you wanted to know what maple sounded like, you just need to listen to a Steinway. It really has a massive influence over what's going on in the tone. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about that. And the reason I'm making a big deal of this is when we then listen to the Bechstein, or when you're comparing Steinways to other pianos, if you look at it through a constructional lens, the difference in the woods that are used, all of a sudden you start to realize why there's such a big difference in sound and why there's such a big difference in projection or dynamic range for instruments using maple versus non-maple. So that's one aspect of the B, or also the D as well. A second one is to get around the fact that when you use maple, sometimes your trebles suffer a little bit. One of the things they do to get around that is, of course, Steinway invented what they called their treble bell, or their treble resonator. I have heard it described online, and this is incorrect, so it's an opportunity to correct this. That bell that you see, and we'll get a shot up of it on the screen for you to see, this is not something that was designed to help retain crown in the soundboard. I've heard this talked about in a few other videos, and this is an erroneous myth. It has nothing to do with soundboard crown, actually. And if you really look at how it's constructed and how it's attached to the piano, and you've got a bit of a mechanical mind, you'll look at this and go, yeah, why on earth would that actually be contributing to helping the soundboard retain its crown? It doesn't. What it does do is it connects one point in the piano, essentially the plate, right at the point where the treble bridge and those treble strings are connecting, with one of the more difficult parts of the piano rim to get resonating. So it's essentially taking frequencies, which maple normally doesn't do a great job of, which is their really, really high frequencies, and it's kind of compressing and amplifying those high-end frequencies and really jamming them into the rim of the piano. So you actually get some liveliness out of the treble. Sometimes when people are looking at Bs and Ds and the piano's sounding a little bit dead, or the trebles don't feel like they're really projecting that well, often the thing that really, really expert technicians will then go in and start to adjust, please do not do this at home, but the expert technicians will start to adjust, is actually that bell. That's one of the biggest influences over how to get the top end of a Steinway speaking. So that's another feature of this. Of course, Steinway became really famous as well for the control and the dynamic range that their action produced, and the accelerated action was one of the big innovations in this area. So you get an instrument that is very responsive, has a really fast repetition speed on the action, and a piano that rather famously almost doesn't seem to have a top end in terms of its dynamic range. You can keep pushing a really great Steinway more and more and more and more, and you never really hear it hit the ceiling. And so that's a combination of a lot of the things I've just talked about, along with a lot of other minute design details that, for those who are really keen, you can go and you can do a little bit more research. So the bottom line is, here's a piano that has literally changed history, that we owe a lot to, and has a really distinctive tonal sound and projection. And a lot of that is not coming from the fact that it says Steinway. I mean, that sound came from very specific designs, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were using maple, that it has this this treble resonating bridge, that it's this, and that it's using a high tension scale design, and the whole thing is designed to just produce this incredibly clear, projecting, sustaining, mid-range focused tone. And of course, it really changed the piano industry and the music industry as a whole for about another at least 120, 130 years. And so we'll be certainly doing some playing on this so that you can hear it. But just quickly, I'll play a little bit on it, and you can hear what I'm talking about in terms of just that mid-range clarity. A great sounding B, and certainly always a solid choice for somebody looking for an instrument capable of a lot of range, a lot of dynamics, and that applies to somebody thinking about a recording studio, a finer instrument for your home, a church, or of course an institution. That said, just because Steinway was able to correct a lot of the failings of older piano design and give us an instrument that was capable of a ton of dynamic range, an accelerated action, and a lot of clarity in the mid-range where other instruments had previously failed to deliver that, certainly does not mean that there is no room for further evolution in the design of pianos. And that's where it's going to be really exciting to actually take a look at the next instrument, which is, of course, the Bechstein 212. Now, the Bechstein 212 is interesting because it draws not only on a lot of the innovations that the Steinway has given, but it also draws on some of the innovations that some of the other well-known piano brands from the early 20th century through the rest of the 20th century has also given us, from brands like Bösendorfer, Blüthner, and Fazioli. So we're going to take a look at that next, and thanks so much for sticking around. We're going to switch pianos and we'll be right back. Thanks for tuning in for another piano review. I'm Stu Harrison. I'm here at Merriam Pianos, and we are just outside of Toronto, Canada. And in front of me today sits two of the world's most acclaimed 7-foot grand pianos. This is something that I'm sure a lot of pianists would be envious to be sitting in front of. And I'm, of course, talking about the Steinway B 7-foot piano, as well as the C Bechstein B212 concert or semi-concert grand piano. All right, so now we're in front of the Bechstein B212, and of course this is their top 7-foot model, and it's the model that probably gets compared to the Steinway B more often than any other instrument, and probably specifically the Hamburg Steinway B. Now, I need to put Bechstein as a brand and this concert line into some context, because people who know Bechstein, people who have heard of Bechstein or are familiar with what they've done a century ago or some of the instruments from the Golden Age, will need to reintroduce themselves to these instruments. This is not the Bechstein of the 1920s. This is not the Bechstein of the late 1800s. The sound has changed, the direction of the company has changed, and what we are looking at is now, rather than a company entirely focused on preserving tradition and entirely focused on creating instruments to sound like they used to, this is a company over the last 20 years that has completely turned itself on its head to create a lean, profitable, stable, growing company, super focused on just making unbelievably killer instruments. So in a way it reminds me of the way that Steinway was in the later 1800s in New York, kind of constantly evolving, constantly pushing themselves. Obviously one of the instruments that was ascending the most rapidly in the high-end market. I think Bechstein very much is enjoying a similar moment in their history, but rather than 120, 130 years ago, it's happening right now, which is pretty cool for those who are shopping for pianos. I have got with me to my left a breakdown of some of the common elements that you'll see, not just in the 212, but some of the other models within the Bechstein line. And of course, we're going to be contrasting that with the Steinway that we were just in front of, and just pulling in a few other comparisons as well. Let's start with the construction of this piano. If you are still listening from the first part of the video where we were talking about the extensive use of maple in the Steinway pianos, what you notice on the C. Bechstein instruments, if you happen to visit a store that has one of these layouts, you're going to notice that rather than the piano being built of one or two types of wood, Bechstein is using a wider variety of hardwoods in its rim construction than any other piano currently being offered that I'm aware of. So instead of just being hard rock maple in the rim, you actually have a really wide variety of woods and fiber lengths being built into the inner and outer rim of the piano. We're talking about birch, beech, mahogany, and maples, all in there in different lamination thicknesses and pressures. Why use all this different wood? I mean, if Steinway was using all maple and it seemed to work just fine, what's the advantage of using all of this other wood? Well, first of all, some of these other woods, even though they're still hardwoods, are actually quite a bit lighter, which means it requires less energy to get these woods vibrating. That's a really important thing. The second thing is, with any type of wood, different hardwoods, because of the pore size and the length of the fiber in those woods, will be better suited for the transmission or vibration of certain frequencies. And so by combining a wide variety of hardwoods in a precision format like this, you actually get a rim which can speak in a wider hertz range than something that's exclusively maple. So whereas the Steinway sound has a lot of clarity in the mid-range, a lot of beautiful sustain in the mid-range, and you can also get a lot of growl because then you get this mid-range punch in the bass. What Bechstein has done is really built on, I think, what Fazioli started experimenting with in the 1980s, which is the use of these multiple types of hardwood laminations to get an even wider frequency range. And now they have just taken it to a whole new level. So what you have with the 212, but you also get this with the 192 in their concert grand, is you get this complete membrane all around the outside of where the soundboard would sit. Not just around the rim, but across this front cross member, cross support, that is all rim material. It's all vertically laminated like this, and the entire thing is capable of vibrating almost like its own drum, if you want to think of it like this, in addition to the soundboard. So that's the first thing that you really hear out of this piano is when you compare it next to the Steinway, whereas the Steinway, as I said, we have this lovely mid-range tone. When you have the advantage of playing them side by side, there's just a lot more frequency that you're hearing. There's a lot more color and harmonics happening in the high end. There's a lot more color and harmonics happening in the low end. Now, this takes a little bit of adjusting to when you're playing because, of course, we're not used to instruments producing this much tone. But once you get used to working with all the different colors, you wind up with a very much an orchestral palette that lets you do things that your ear is telling you you want to experiment with, and after a few minutes, I mean, you just settle into it like crazy. It's a wonderful instrument to play. You'll also notice, if you can see this on the camera, that the Bechstein, just like the Steinway, also uses a treble bell. So on top of all of the different hardwoods in the rim now starting to resonate a little bit better than just an exclusively maple rim, you also have this innovation that Steinway produced quite a while ago, now being introduced on Bechstein as well, to even further strengthen the treble. A lot of technicians and performers will tell you, brand aside, that one of the hardest things to get happening really, really nicely is good treble sustain and good treble clarity and projection on a piano. It's a sign of great design. This comes in spades. So that's another very, very interesting feature. A third feature would be the bridge. Now, the bridge, like the rim, is vertically laminated and capped, just like the Steinway. And what's interesting is the bridge on the Bechstein looks an awful lot like the Steinway. So rather than go way off in the deep end and try something completely new, in that particular case, Bechstein is actually sticking with primarily a maple bridge, maple cap, and vertically laminated. But the lamination style that they're using is quite interesting. You really have to just take a look at it when you're in front of one of these designs so that you can look at how perfectly matched the grains are in the bridge. Another thing I'm going to point out with the Bechstein soundboard, which is quite unique, and nobody even pointed this out. We noticed this when we were really doing a deep dive on some of the training on these instruments a few weeks ago. Is that the planks between all of the joints between all the planks on the soundboard are actually serrated. So rather than just being, one end of plank, another end of plank, and you're gluing those like a standard lamination, of course, people who really know Busendorfer well will know that Busendorfer does a tongue and groove. So they don't do just the straight planking like most do. But what Bechstein's done here is they serrate them. So you'll see almost like a jagged 3 or 4 back and forths between each one. Now what that means is you're doubling the surface area that each plank is touching, which means for double the surface area you can now have a thinner amount of glue and a higher amount of connection point between those two. So again, the entire point of everything that we're talking about, because I realize it's a lot of detail, but just bear with me here, the entire point of what we're talking about is a piano that is supposed to be capable of responding to very low levels of energy. And so the hallmark to all of this, because as I said, I know this is very technical, but the hallmark to all of this is when you sit down at a B212 and you play a single note, the most uncanny thing happens. And it's the first piano I've ever had this happen to, and it was shocking the first time I heard it. As you play the note, there's actually a bloom to the note for about a quarter to a half second. The sound actually grows a little bit as that sound and that energy dissipates throughout the whole structure of the instrument. It's like the instrument is just sitting there primed, waiting for the tiniest little bit of energy to be sent through the strings, and then the whole thing just comes alive, and you're getting more back from the instrument than you're putting in, which is such a satisfying, exciting thing as a musician. Very few instruments will give that to you, regardless of whether you're talking about piano or drums or violin. But I do think that some string players can relate to this. A really great violin or a really great cello has this amazing bloom to the tone as well. So that's all we're going to talk about in terms of the Bechstein for now. Technically, we are going to get to the playing, and we're going to see how all this technical stuff actually manifests itself in here. And again, we'll just talk a little bit about how that compares to the Steinway. One other point I will bring up before I forget, because there's some other brands that have made a big deal of this. Bechstein actually doesn't make a big deal of it, but it is verified that this is where they get it from. The soundboard material on the concert series Bechsteins comes from the Val de Fiemme. So this is exactly the same wood source that Stradivarius got for his violins. It's a very exclusive wood lot. Very few trees come out of this place. Every tree is accounted for, and there are not very many wood suppliers that have access to that area of the world. And so there's only a handful of instruments, piano or otherwise, that have the privilege of using that wood in their instrument. Very pleased to announce, of course, that Bechstein is one of them. And you certainly hear it in the responsiveness and just how lovely a sustaining tone you can get out of the piano. So we're going to spin around, and we're going to get right to some playing so you can hear what we're talking about. And again, thanks so much for sticking around through the video. Hope you're enjoying it so far.